Well, it's 7 o'clock, so I think we can get going. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Russell, the Emeritus Professor of Theology and Science at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, and the founder of CTNS. Welcome to our third international online conference of VAI, ? Important to keep the question mark there. Cultural Evolution, Artificial Intelligence, and Virtue, sponsored by CTNS through a generous grant from the John Templeton Foundation. Thanks to Chang and Song for his extensive support of the website and planning for VAI. Special thanks to Braden Mullock, who is the Ian G. Barber Assistant Professor of Theology, Science, Ethics, and Technology at CTNS, and the Director of CTNS, and the Project Director of VAI. Before I give it over to Braden, I just want to note that I just yesterday read the 14th of July, 2023 Science magazine. You can see it. And the key, it's a special magazine, and the key article is AI, a machine intelligent world. Excuse me. I recommend you read it if you haven't already. So we'll have a great conference. I'll join you in the audience, and Braden, it's yours.
And good morning and good afternoon, good evening to everybody. We're sort of spanning a number of time zones. It's great to be with you all. As Bob said, this is the third and final of 3 conferences that we'll be doing as part of this project. Last but certainly not least by any means. So the grant was sort of envisioned as a way to engage with work that is going on in artificial intelligence, but also to try and bring something specific and yet diverse to the conversation. So both the Templeton Foundation and CTNS were sort of committed to having a project that would be open to a number of different perspectives. And the metaphor that we developed in thinking about the grant was that of a fire engine, in the sense that, as you know, there's a lot of attention that's being given to artificial intelligence in a number of ways. And so there are a number of fire trucks that have been mobilized towards a lot of fires in terms of issues, but this grant was going to be something small compared to some of the other things that are being done. So we wanted to be able to make sure that our bucket made a difference. And so that's how we centered on this question of virtue and the 3 core questions that we're looking at. And each of the 3 conferences has been very interesting to see how people have approached these questions. Sometimes the underside of the can AI help us be more virtuous, or can AI be virtuous, has sort of been highlighted. And we sort of have left the questions asked that way for it to be either a yes or no. And then also the composition of how many papers are focused on each of the questions. For the first conference that was done here in Pacific time in Berkeley, it was pretty evenly split between the 3 core questions of, how will AI shape human culture? Can AI help us be more virtuous? And can AI have virtue? But both the Seoul conference and this conference are a little more heavily weighted towards the 3rd question, which is interesting, I think, because we've had some colleagues sort of scoff at that particular question. We had a colleague sort of jokingly say, well, my car doesn't have virtue. And depending on the virtue tradition that you come from, you could say that, in fact, Aristotle would say if the vehicle is well designed and acts out its intended purpose, that it does have a virtue in a sense. So we've learned a lot about the assumptions that people make when they talk about virtue. What they typically mean is often moral virtue, but the grant can obviously explore more than just that. We've been very, very pleased to have a wide spectrum of views, both in support and critical of sort of some of the core questions, or what AI will be capable of, is capable of currently. So the way that we'll proceed today, we've seen a few of these names in the audience for some of the other conferences, but just so everyone's sort of on the same page, each panelist is going to be given about 10 minutes to sort of highlight or summarize what they're working on. Maybe they want to focus on a particular area where they have questions, or they'd like some input. We've sort of left it up to the panelists to use that time as they see fit. And then we're going to have about 20 minutes for conversation, mostly amongst the panelists. And this model was sort of developed by Bob and others as part of a collaboration with the CTNS and the Vatican Observatory over a 20-year span, where it really allows people to sort of build up the work of others, strengthen arguments, and get some meaningful conversation going. The Q&A box and the chat are open at all times, and we're encouraging people who are attendees in the Zoom webinar here to put questions in at any time. And we'll draw from those during the general question and answer time. But panelists have also been engaging with those questions when they have time and as they see fit. And we'll also be making sure that the panelists have a copy of those questions at the end of the conference as well, so we can see if there wants to be any follow-up or further questions, things like that. I think that's about all I have to say for the core of the conference and how we're planning on proceeding. So if there aren't any questions, maybe we'll go ahead and maybe for the first time, maybe all conference remain on time or early, and we'll move to our first presentation of the day, which is from Robert Geraci, who's a professor of religious studies at Manhattan College. Who's written extensively on issues in artificial intelligence. So Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I assume everybody can hear me just fine. Otherwise, just shout out. It's a delight to be here. And in looking at the papers, I really love the variety of approaches. And I'm really grateful to our benevolent overlords for putting us together and giving us an opportunity to talk. As Braden said, I've spent a fair bit of time kind of trying to think about AI for a while, and connections with religion and connections with other parts of culture, and have had the opportunity to occasionally talk about those things around the world in a variety of ways. So it's particularly cool that this is, our multi-time zone universe. But one of the things that kind of comes back to me over and over again is the importance of trying to figure out what we can imagine in the world, and why we imagine those things the way we do. I previously credited in my life playing Dungeons and Dragons as a way of having learned to do what I call dream rigorously, because you dream and then you add math to that, right? And how does your math help you work out what you're envisioning? And so in some sense, I'm really invested in this idea of how narratives work and how we construct the narratives, and then how we perhaps play them out in the real world. So when you look at things like AI, and people very frequently, they'll go back to like Mary Shelley, right? And how when she imagined an artificial humanoid, it was with consideration for the human condition, the relationship between humanity and its pursuit of power or transcendence or knowledge or skill. And, in thinking about that relationship, it became a Gothic horror. 100 years later, when Isaac Asimov imagined an artificial humanoid in his robot trilogy, it was with consideration for the human condition again, but in his case, the relationship of human beings with other forms of intelligent life and our ability to extend our friendship across those boundaries. I can't help but think that this made particular sense during the Cold War. And so it leads me to wonder, what lies behind the way that we're choosing to envision the things that we're envisioning. When we imagine right here in the contemporary moment, artificial general intelligence, what is the framework for our consideration? I mean, I remember in 2007, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, a roboticist scoffing at the phrase artificial general intelligence, and the entire premise around it was one that he just thought fairly ludicrous, right? But now in 2023, AGI is now like kind of the hot, one of those hot terms, and it's all over the place. And part of what's built into that is what we might be fearing and what we might be wanting. So when I think about what I fear and what I want, part of that is in the policy domain. I'm not happy with governments accepting voluntary agreements with industry, for example. The latest White House agreement is vague, and the industry goal is more than clear to those of us who are watching from the outside. Industry wants to avoid regulation. So they'll come in and make kind of vague promises about what they're going to do. Well, that doesn't make me happy. when Microsoft engaged, they made this big splash with the Vatican ethics principles and stuff. And then like a year later, they fired their top level AI ethics team. So voluntary stuff doesn't really, get very far in my universe. And I do think we need ways to regulate and ways to incentivize and so forth, right? And in the AI kind of chatter domain that we're all in, getting AI ethics right is important and will help get us AI safety right, assuming that's ever really an issue, right? AI ethics is an immediate concern. Are we building machines that exacerbate inequalities and so forth, or are we building machines that will make the world better? And then the AI safety is that hypothetical long-term, are the robots going to take over kind of question, right? I'm far more worried about climate change than I am robot overlords, but I figure an effective AI ethics intervention would make the overlords unlikely anyway. So toward that end, and kind of the sort of theoretical premise behind what I shared with everyone in the written version, is that I want to focus on the importance of fieldwork and intercultural exchange. An expansive view of human to human culture perhaps can help us have an expansive view of human to non-human culture. One of the terms of the day in AI ethics, we see it, I think it might have been Kanta de Hall and Stephen Cave who were first talking about decolonization in paper, probably not though. They had that whiteness paper that was quite good. But decolonization is this very important thing that we're kind of working on. And it's an important step for all of us, especially those of us who are in kind of the most powerful nations in the world, either in recent memory or present, where we have this tendency to have one way of looking at the world. And we think our one way of looking at the world is the way to look at the world. And our way of looking at progress is the way of looking at progress. And we need to move beyond that. And the only way we move beyond that really is by talking to one another and trying to learn from one another and actually living alongside one another. Unfortunately, living alongside one another is like problematized by climate change, right? Every time we travel, we're contributing to that. And there's also a funding climate, totally different kind of climate problem. The funding climate is not awesome for our efforts at intercultural exchange. But it is important to move people around and gain the kind of barest sense of what others think, which we can get if we can live amongst them, even not a very deep sense of how others live and think. It's better than we might otherwise have, especially those of us who might have grown up in something of a cocoon, right? I grew up in Texas, which is as cocooned as it gets. In thinking about that and my own kind of long stays in India and shorter collaborations in Korea and my efforts to bring collaborators to America, I became interested in kind of consensus values and how we might regulate for them, how we would think about them. Most of you have probably heard of the biologist J.B.S. Haldane. What you may not know is Haldane's position on animal research is that he wouldn't do anything to an animal that he wouldn't do either to himself or one of his voluntary lab assistants. That's a really interesting ethos for research. And I'm not saying it would have been the correct way, but it might have prevented Elon Musk from torturing uncounted monkeys on the way to Neuralink. I don't know. But I try to think about what the values are that I might be learning from other people and finding correlates and perhaps designing the world for explicit rather than implicit values. Because we have implicit values in our system, and those are things, whether those are things about the singularity and transcendent robot gods, or whether they're just about economic efficiency and profit motives. Our implicit values are not the best way to bias our technologies. Our technologies will have biases. And so we ought to start being really, really manifestly explicit about what biases we want to give them. The problem there is, well, there are manifold problems, and I'm happy to have people share their thoughts on any of that, right? Like, how do you build trust with technologists, designers, and so forth? How do you get policymakers to understand that the experts in any given domain are not just the people making the thing? How do you get government research funding that really engages the ethics question? I've evaluated things for the National Science Foundation in the US where a roboticist says that they're going to do the ethics research component of what they're engaged in. If I proposed a grant to the NSF where I said I was going to design robots, the reviewers would immediately toss that out. So this idea that anyone can do ethics is then exacerbated by the kind of incapacity of many of us to actually build ethics across our borders, right? But if you live in a silo of your own salvation, you're probably going to get ignored. So ultimately, pushing all around this is how we might reorient our design ethos in industry, in government. Do we do this through regulation? Do we incentivize it? It's very easy to co-opt a tech company, right? OpenAI was originally designed to kind of be like the AI for all of us or whatever. And then Microsoft bought it. And how are we going to deal with the immense gulfs between our various virtue systems? But one thing that for me ties this all together, and with which I will conclude, is the idea that in talking about the different value systems, in talking about the different ways, that one might think about self-control, self-mastery, for example, Swaraj in India, how that might correspond to my life in America and so forth, whether or not we get something like AGI, we probably learn something about virtue. So talking about virtue and what would constitute virtue in our machines and in our design of machines may actually be a productive element in actually becoming more virtuous ourselves. At any rate, we could dream that that might be the case. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Robert. I always loved your presentations. I remember from AI in Faith. Actually, as an economist, I could not be excited by your talk, and I heard words as an economist resonate very well, like regulations, incentives, etc. And I did my PhD in the chair of economics of regulation. So to see
my father was an economist.
Yeah,
I'm like corrupted.
But I would say, listening to you, in fact, there are two ways to regulate behaviors and to regulate towards good behaviors. So either you have a minority of good behavior and a majority of bad behaviors, and in this case, you reward the good behavior. Either you have a majority of good behavior and a minority of bad behavior, and you punish the bad behavior. So, and you use the Pigouvian methodology to evaluate how much you need to incentivize the good behavior and how much you need to punish the bad behavior. And in this way, you find what we call the social equilibrium, because economic equilibrium, it's never social equilibrium. We always have these externalities that are not integrated. So I think we could apply this logic to AI regulation too, because you of course have benefits and costs. Of course you have positive externalities and negative externalities. I think the only thing we need to decide upon it's what it's who will be the one. So because who will make the rules actually of the games, considering that in reality the governments don't have the competence now to do it. I mean, without, this is the reality we have to recognize, without the big companies and the knowledge and the expertise, they would be unable to do that. So thank you so much. This is my insight.
No, that's all of that is fabulous. Really terrific response. I'm always reminded on the government, whenever I say the government should get involved, I remember Ted Stevens from Alaska saying that the internet is a bunch of tubes that college students were clogging up with their illegal movies. And this like, I mean, his divorce from what constituted the internet was so manifestly palpable that you have to wonder, but I mean, that is what it is, and we have to work within that framework. But right now, the only people making those announcements, a bunch of like powerful industrialists show up at Davos and they make a claim about what's going on in the world, and then the rest of us are supposed to be grateful for whatever peanut they threw to the concept of building things in a good way. And yeah, I think we do have to figure out how to get that really open conversation that does its best to draw people together and have a conversation about what we want and how we're going to get it, and then have the incentive versus regulation conversation, right? I think you're dead on, and it's hard.
Hi, thanks. So two things really. One is it's useful to identify incentives and punishment as ways of influencing moral behavior, but they don't exhaust the ways in which moral behavior can be influenced. There are also, for example, imitation of charismatic leaders and social bonding mechanisms like the ones that come out of trance dancing. So, I mean, I just want to broaden the set of ways of influencing moral behavior. So, but that's just a comment really arising from the last contribution. But I want to ask Robert really how he, I noticed in the paper, you reject both sort of universalism, the idea that any particular set of moral values is universal, and you also reject moral relativism. So I'm interested in how you sort of steer a path between those two things. And I guess the only way you can, I don't know if this is what you intend, is to propose some sort of natural moral order, some sort of Platonic set of moral values that transcends any particular culture, which may be reflected, however imperfectly, in any particular culture. Is that how you square the circle, or do you have some other way of doing it?
You know, someone just had to come in and bring up the thing that I've like been angry at myself about for decades. Yeah, this is a really, I do want to say one of the reasons I care about narratives about AI and have been writing about how we talk about AI is that's also a way of influencing people's behavior also. And we have to figure out really expansive narratives if we want to learn how to grow with our technologies. But this question of universalism versus relativism, I gotta say, the idea that there are no kind of like good ways to live in the world, like all ways are equally valid or something, strikes me as inherent nonsense, right? There obviously are better and worse ways to live in the world. As you say, like trying to universalize the approach to getting at that is probably deeply problematic, right? It leads us to try to control others, which is why, you know, when a fair amount of my work happens in kind of interreligious contexts. And I first try to get people to accept that interreligious is not the same as interfaith. Faith has a particular valence that emerges largely out of the history of the Protestant Reformation. So when we talk about interfaith, we've already put everybody in certain kinds of boxes. And interreligious also is certain kinds of boxes. I mean, how many definitions of religion are there? There are literally whole papers written that delineate, you know, 80 different definitions of religion. But interreligion, I'm a little more comfortable with. And then we can start talking about what we want the world to look like. Rather than what I need you to believe or who I need you to be, we can talk about what the world, you know, what seems like a productive thing for the world. And I feel like we usually get in better places at that point. And then we start finding shared values, right? We can find shared values around, if I give you a simple question that I think is very related to AI and kind of emergent out of my experiences in India. If I ask you, should you be using a technology to make sure you can control others or to make sure you have control over yourself? Most of us are going to say, I'd rather that technology granted me control over my own life. Right. And we see this problem on the internet, for example, where a technology that's designed to let me shout at other people is widespread. And the technology to protect myself from being shouted at is limited. And I think we should get to live in a world where we don't have to get shouted at. We live with AI technologies like deep fakes, but our web browsers don't automatically tell us, hey, there's like a 90% certainty that this is a deep fake. A technology that's built in that helps me protect myself and control my own universe is probably more productive than one that lets me try to control your universe. But we could have that conversation, right? And if we had an opportunity, more opportunities to really talk to each other, even without me needing to accept, you know, you and I don't have to agree on why that might be the case, that it's valuable for you to get to control your own life and not for me to get to control it. We may not agree on why that's the case, but in practice, we might get pretty far. So that's kind of how I've tried to float between those I mean, this is kind of the like postmodern condition, right? Or postmodern, I don't know, where we all sitting around trying to figure out how we get to have values at all. And for me, it's been in that level of like, how can we get the world sort of in the places, you know, I think we all want food, right? So technologies that are designed to feed all the people seem pretty reasonable to me. Technologies to hoard the food seem not reasonable, whatever our rationale might be. I hope that was like, you know I was on the question. I don't know that I answered it well, though. I see Selmer's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that talk, Robert. Mini talk. Yeah, I'm on the topic of regulations, 2 comments. You know, we really don't try to, quote, regulate and incentivize or de-incentivize people who might want to build nuclear weapons and variations of weapons of mass destruction. So my first point would be, I think we're just essentially begging the question against a number of people who are making a cogent scientific engineering case for the proposition that deep learning in particular makes no sense whatsoever to even allow in most contexts, okay? Deep learning is an utterly, mathematically speaking, mysterious operation. It is incapable, a system using it, incapable of being verified. So the code, for example, that you have students in intro classes getting back for programs, they have no idea whether those programs are correct. And as you ask for more robust programs, God forbid, in the world, you'll have no idea whether they're any good. And the empirical evidence so far, and leave aside the formal evidence, is that, for example, GPT-4 cannot even add. It can't program except for these elementary snippets. So this would be my first concern is if we allow what's happening to continue on the government side, it's already, as you point out, at least indirect, it's already allowing this absolute nonsense to happen. Deep fakes are created in an adversarial, fraud context. But you get deep fakes because people don't know what they're doing with this technology when they want code. So I would say, and I'm not alone, I would say we need to stop this. I mean, we need to simply stop it for many domains, okay? Fortunately, the skepticism along the line I'm articulating is generally affirmed by people in NATO. Can't say otherwise. And if that ever changed, that would be really bad. As they point out, well, how would I ever use deep learning in a system that had kinetic power? I'd have no idea ahead of time that it wouldn't do really, really destructive things. It's a crazy proposition. The second point I would make is that, so I was at AGI 2023. I thought I was, I gave a talk and many demos to the side. I gave, I think, 27 simple logic and math problems that GPT-4 not just didn't get right, but totally bungled. I thought I was going to be assassinated. So, and I'm not, intellectually, let's put it metaphor, I'm really not exaggerating, okay? So you have a case where a bunch of Microsoft employees write a paper called Sparks of AGI for GPT-4. And it's completely deceptive. For example, the theorem and proof that they throw in there saying, oh, wow, GPT gets Euclid's theorem. We're talking over 2 millennia. Okay, there's so much pre-existing text for that cobbling it together out of what's already in the data is an absurd thing to tout. So they can't be trusted. That's not religion. That's profit-driven marketing. So this is a perfect storm. You have the people in I allude to them. Some of them are my friends who are just fundamentalists beyond belief emotionally when it comes to AGI and aren't necessarily there to make a buck. And at the same time, you have people who are going to make a buck off this by hook or by crook and are exaggerating the capability. So those were just a couple of comments I had.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, again, you're right on top of some really important issues. I mean, I'll tell you, I bucked the trend also in not being all that excited about GPT. I mean, it's really fast. It does some interesting things, but the fact that it makes stuff up, the fact that it can't add, the fact that it can't even count the numbers, like you can ask it for a word count and it'll get it wrong. And you can say you did that wrong and it'll get it wrong again. I mean, there's just like a host of things that to my mind really make it not that awesome. But I am interested in its climate impact, on the computing impact, on the training data climate impact. Those things interest me significantly and worry me. I am interested in its impact on things like education and so forth. But ultimately, this is partly why I don't like voluntary agreements. And I think we have to find ways to regulate. I mean, we do regulate around nuclear weaponry. You know, we don't follow the regulations very effectively. And our country is, my country is part of that problem, right? But there are technically global laws associated with that. And I think we should, you know, even if it's not a perfect thing, and of course, nuclear bombs aren't a great corollary to say biotech or AI, because you can engineer a virus in your garage, really, if you have like a few $1,000s worth of equipment, you could experiment, right? And with a few $1,000s worth of equipment, you can experiment in AI, but you can't do it in nuclear weaponry. So I know it's not a great analogy, but we do try to regulate. And I really think we ought to be not just letting companies, and in part it's because of what you're saying, right? If a person who's built a product and they're so deeply emotionally committed to it that they tell you they think it's intelligent, when it can't count, like, you know, that's not the person I need voluntarily, you know, deciding what they're going to do with the technology. We really have to think about how we're going to overcome people's implicit biases toward or against it, overcome people's built-in economic incentives and that sort of thing, and really engage what is it that we collectively want. Because you're right, we may have a conversation where we would collectively say, you know what, deep learning is not that great of a technology, and it's not doing us any good, both because it's opaque in its decision making and the mistakes it makes and so forth. And the US military has a 30-year history of opaque AI decision making in military that goes back to the Aegis system and the downing, that's a nice way of putting, we blew up an Iranian civil airliner, in part because of bad understandings of an AI generated data point. So we do have a lot that we really should be talking about with a great deal of clarity, to try to figure out why we're doing what we're doing, right? And what are the narratives that are building our sense of what we want? And are we really dreaming, you know, going back to what I said at the beginning, are we dreaming with rigor, or are we just kind of like making stuff up and hoping for the best? Because that's just I mean, that might be the human condition, right? You remember the beginning of Winnie the Pooh, where Edward Bear is coming down the steps, bump, bump, bump on his head. And he's sure that if he could just stop and think about it for a moment, there must be a better way. But then again, maybe there isn't, right? I mean, it's one of the most profound things I ever read about the human condition, is this, like, we're all bumping down on our heads, hoping there's a better way to do it, but it's hard to stop and think about it. I think
just a couple quick things. At least on my end, the first hand up goes to the top left. I don't know if that shows up for everybody else, but it gives me at least a chronological order. But I'm happy to continue to moderate. So then my second point then is minor, but on page 8 you say it would be unreasonable to believe that the human equivalent machines can be virtuous if all the AI technologies leading to them are devoted single-mindedly to capitalist efficiency, profit maximizing, and control over human beings through surveillance and military precision. Now, unfortunately, I think I have to say that those are virtues in some contexts. And so, at least throughout this conference, this set of conferences, I'm sort of learning to have a little bit of disdain for the word virtue as I do for the term pro-social behavior, in the sense of these are things that we say are constitutive of morality, but at the same time, are maybe necessary but insufficient conditions, in the sense of, you know, that is a virtue. Efficiency is a virtue, but if that virtue can do terrible things in people's lives, similarly with pro-social behavior. So I don't have a concrete solution, but again, I think that you're probably meaning moral virtue in that sense, and I'm using virtue in a broader definition.
And of course, there are people who have said capitalist efficiency is a moral virtue too, right? That it's not just a virtue in money making, that it's like God's plan or whatever else. So you're 100% right. And, you know, maybe it goes back in religious studies, we've gotten pretty cautious, usually defining things like what we mean by the word religion. I didn't in this little paper, but often we do that kind of thing. You know, and Beth in her great paper actually does like a little bit of that kind of theory work. We probably should be doing similar kind of theory work on what we mean if we say this is virtuous as opposed to this. Virtue for what? Virtue toward what end? Where am I coming from with that? Yeah, so one of the things, you know, this question about dissenting minorities, right? This is actually super important. You can think about this in US legal jurisprudence, where for, you know, decades and decades, the law in the US basically supported the right of majorities over the right of minorities, right? And then what happened was the Holocaust. And US jurisprudence did a 180 on that. We're like, oh, wait a minute. If you let the majority decide what's right, sometimes they do horrible, horrible things, right? So you had to have a sense where you were protecting. So then US legal jurisprudence started protecting the minority, right? And said, well, no, you can't, you have to start at that point. So we absolutely need a starting point for how we're going to do that. My own sense is that we ought to be protecting, start at the most vulnerable and protect their interests first. You know, I mean, we look at things like the impact of pollution or climate change or whatever else on the impoverished, on people of color, right? Those impacts are much more pronounced than they are on middle and upper class white people in America, for example. So we ought to be trying to figure out, okay, if we're talking about our consensus building process, are we protecting those who are most vulnerable, right? Is our kind of pursuit of justice centered around that? Or is it centered around, you know, kind of, I get dubious of sort of greatest good for the greatest number concepts, because that might entail, you know, really a horrible descent into kind of the worst of what we are as people. So I think that's a really important question, but you're right, Hans. I do think that consensus through collaboration is important, but that's also why I think it's so important for people to try to live alongside one another a little bit, as you start to get a slightly better sense for other people's needs. And that's not a perfect system, and we're not all even open to that. Sometimes we're just not open to other people's needs. And again, that's why we have to move toward broader conversations, at least where we have an opportunity to put it on the table, where we have a clear conversation where someone has to come forth and say, this is why I don't care about that community, right? This is why their opinion doesn't matter. And then we could have, you know, I mean, if I said, well, I don't really care what Jeff Bezos thinks on this because he owns like 19 yachts. You may not agree with my logic, right? Like, but at least you know where I'm coming from. If you come to the table and you say, well, I don't care what those people think because they happen to be in religion X. Well, I know what your rationale is, and I have the grounds to try to dispute your rationale, right? So I do think we have to be hyper vigilant about minorities, but particularly about marginalized communities. And then all on the table, we try to figure it out together. And that's obviously going to be imperfect because we're human beings and everything we do is imperfect. But I'm such a glass is half full kind of guy that I feel like if we tried vigilantly, we would mostly do things kind of okay. But I don't know that we always try vigilantly, despite my optimism.
Presentation.
Thank y'all very much.
So our next paper is from Sunday Akande, who is an incoming PhD student here at the Graduate Theological Union in Practical Theology. Sunday is also the founder and president of the Center for Leadership Development in Africa. And this is a co-authored paper with another GTU doctoral student here at CTNS, Toby Ife-Adediran. So I think we're going to be hearing from both of them in this presentation. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Braden, for the beautiful introduction. It's good to be here again. I was here in the first conference, the first VAI conference in Berkeley, and it was such an exciting time. And it's good to be here again with very amazing people to continue to engage in this conversation about virtuous AI. And I want to thank the organizers for the beautiful work that they've been doing in the past weeks concerning these conferences. So we're contributing to this conference, looking at the topic, the socio-cultural decolonization regime of African liberation.
Yeah, well, he sent me a message to take over. I think he has a problem with his audio. Thank you, Braden, and every other participants. I am Sunday Akande. I was also at the first conference in Berkeley, especially when my African brother, Oluwatobi Ife-Adediran, was presenting. I was I was there then. I also attended other talk. I enjoyed the discussions we had over there. Like he said, today we'll be talking about the socio-cultural decolonization regime of African liberation and the hypothesis of virtuous AI, a technological revolution in critical context. All right. And, to take us through this discussion, I'll be discussing AI in everyday modern life, revolutionary or prejudicial AI. Want to compare the two, whether it is the revolutionary or prejudicial, both. Then I'll talk about colonial hegemony in Africa. Then we'll see how technology and neocolonialism are going side by side, how technology is aiding neocolonialism, especially in Africa. Then I'll talk about virtuous AI in the neocolonial regime, and that's our proposal, how artificial intelligence can be virtuous even in this neocolonial regime. Yeah, our abstract is this. This paper presents a contextual hypothesis of virtuous AI in relation to the socio-cultural decolonization regime of African liberation. It argues that technology has been utilized in the fortification of neocolonial forces in areas like data exploitation, market monopoly, global digital divide, intellectual property constraints, and the falsification of information through digital media. Virtuous AI is conceived as a revolutionary technology that confronts the ills that are associated with neocolonialism. In the critical context under this concentration, in this context that we are discussing today, virtuous AI should be accoutred with features that contribute to the validation of the original worldviews of the African socio-cultural milieu. So what we are proposing is that anything that artificial intelligence would do, especially in Africa, it should be that supports the worldview of the African society. That takes us to AI in everyday modern life. Of course, AI is very, very important and has been helpful, is beneficial to mankind. And we'll see that AI has the capability to do predictive analytics that humans human beings might not be able to do or might not be as efficient as AI would do in a very short time. It can be, it has a capability to make recommendation based on the analysis that it has done. It can be used for speech recognition. All this we know. We can be used for image processing, and it can also do, it has the capability to do sentiment analysis that will be devoid of sentiment that when human beings do that might be sentimental in his or her approach. Then all this makes the AI to benefit, to undo what we call big data. And, big data handling is something that humans may not be able to do, like I said the other time, in a very short time. And because AI is also accurate, when it handles all those things, and also efficient, it has been used for transport, to aid transportation. And that is why autonomous vehicles are now rampant, and discussion of it that autonomous vehicles can do things that other vehicles, manual vehicles and other may not be able to do. And I remember that the old robot was talking about deep learning, if I heard well, in healthcare. AI has been also applied. It has also been applied to our banking sector, marketing and production, and all these are, have shown that AI is very, very important in our modern day life, and it has come to stay. AI has come to stay. It can also only be improved upon to be better, and especially to be virtuous, which is the basis for our discussion in this conference. Now, is AI revolutionary or prejudicial? We want to see that, or is it both? In principle, the human which AI is modeled after is generic and transcends gender, race, social class, geopolitical location, or even religious affiliation. I remember during the Berkeley conference, Ife-Adediran was emphasizing the fact that a human or a person to an average African is not just a body, it's not just a figure. It's a combination of spirit, soul, and body, plus virtues that he has garnered over a number of years, norms of society, cultures, systems of the African society that he has acquired over a number of years. So we are saying that in principle that the human that AI is modeled after is generic, and it transcends gender, race, and all of that. But AI can be used, or is being used, to cause gender bias, racial division. There are some social class, geopolitical zones that can have access to some artificial intelligence, information, and all of that. So that is what we are saying, that even though AI is revolutionary, it can also be used as a weapon of prejudicial, destruction, something. And that is what we have said in this slide, that it suffices to state that artificial intelligence retains its revolutionary status as long as it obliterates the fault lines that impede the collective human identity and flourishing. So if it does not obliterate those fault lines, then it means it is not revolutionary. But if as long as it does that, it is revolutionary. But at the same time, we are saying that artificial intelligence machines or tools can also be tools in the hands of some people to aid colonialism. And that is what we are saying here, that the unfounded reputation regarding the repression of humans by sentient machines, as well as the fair criticism of the discriminatory features that malign public trust in the objective quality of AI thrive on the egregious prejudice against the human order. You know, here I need to lay emphasis on the fact that an average African has a suspicion, you know, towards you know, former colonial powers, that everything that they bring now is, you know, has behind it a hidden agenda to recolonize, you know, the society, the African society. All right, so and that, you know, trepidation, you know, is always there. That suspicion is always there. And that leads us to colonial hegemony in Africa. Okay, so for you to know where that suspicion came from, we need to understand what happened during the colonial era. You know, Jim Anselm and John Thomas, you know, said something. They opined that something called psychological violence happened during colonial era. Okay, and that was you know, a kind of agenda of colonial powers to universalize Western worldview. You know, the colonial powers brought their cultures, their norms, I mean, their worldviews, their system to dominate African cultures. And you will see from this map how all these colonial powers, you know, their influence on different African nations. So how you can see their maps here over the African continent is to tell you that, you know, they brought the dominance of their culture, of their worldview over, and that's what Jim Anselm and John Thomas called psychological violence. You know, and that led to racial superiority versus inferiority, to the extent that, you know, cultural norms, values, beliefs, and practices of African continent were eroded to the extent that Western philosophers and thinkers like Immanuel Kant, George Hegel, and David Hume regarded Africans as inferiors without a history and philosophy. Okay, and that's what Kwasi Wadu, a Ghanaian, called fatal reductionism. That even if there will be things to reintroduce the African, you know, culture, norms, and values back, you know, it might be too late, because you know, the continents have been reduced to fatal, you know, have been refused fatally or drastically. So now it also led to power rationing, socio-cultural alienation, invasion, and disruption. You know, that you know, disrupted a lot of things in Africa, especially when it comes to the African culture and belief system and all of that. So that formed the basis of an average African suspicion towards anyone who brings anything that looks like control or dominance over. Then resource control also happened, and economic dominance, as stated by Johnson, Robinson, and Ismonglu. Now, after the colonial era, we are now experiencing, you know, new colonial influence through economic and political forces, you know, to the extent that during the I mean, as stated by Johnson and Robinson, that you know, during towards the end of the 20th century, the African resources were eroded to the extent that it caused relative poverty. Okay, and it's also now happening during the neo-colonial era, you know, because the economy and the political forces are being influenced by the former colonial powers, you know, because there are now interests through sanctions, through some levels of, you know, some levels of control in the African nations' politics, you know, from the Western world, from the former colonial powers. You know, an average African thinks that this dominance has not ended, it has continued. And that leads us to what we call technology and neocolonialism. How is now, you know, I've talked about how our economy, our politics, and you know, leadership are being influenced by former colonial powers. Then now that takes us to how technology is now being used as a weapon to aid neocolonialism. And the first thing we are talking about here is indiscriminate surveillance and control. Indiscriminate surveillance and control. We are of the opinion that there are many world powers. There are many that we are former colonial powers that are making that are doing surveillance and control over the territories of former colonies, and these are done indiscriminately. You agree with me that recently, I think in February this year, China sent a spy balloon to the US space. Okay, so whether for security reasons or for to gather information, I might not know, but African countries or Africans are beginning to think if China could do such to the United States of America, which is the world leader, world power, how much more when it comes to African nations that are underdeveloped. That means the surveillance can be done, and control can be made indiscriminately. And that also leads us to, I will cite another example concerning surveillance and control. During the NSAS protest in Nigeria, the government denied the fact that live bullets were used against young people that were protesting. But the US security showed a video that indicated that live bullets were used, and they even said that they had more classified information. That was done in a good way, to support young people that were protesting, and we love that. But average Africans were beginning to think, okay, if that could be done in a good way, then that could also be done in a bad way. All right, so that could also be used indiscriminately to gain control over territories of the African countries. Then that leads us to data breach. There is now more online presence. There's now more information on the internet, unlike it used to be in the past. And because AI experts, developers are hungry for more data, they can go to any length to gather information, to look for information, even if they are doing it against the laws and the data protection standards. So this is what happens. This is what happens, and we feel that regulators behind this, regulators that should step in to regulate these, developers and experts are not doing it right. Just like Robert said the other time, that regulations are not being put in place to check AI experts and developers. Then we're also talking about technocracy. We have seen the fact that there are now nations that are technologically savvy, and that are using that to control other nations who are not technologically savvy. So then that's leading to the widening of the digital divide. Now we are going to the last slide before the conclusion, and this is our proposal that any artificial intelligence that will be put in place should be virtuous, even during this new colonial regime. The first thing we examine is that there is already a divisive line. We should not run away from the fact that there is a wide gap between the advanced countries and underdeveloped nations, like underdeveloped continents like Africa. So AI developers and other stakeholders should be sensitive to know that AI should not be weaponizing neocolonialism. Then they should be transparent. I mean, there should be equity, in whatever they do, anything they will do to solve the problems that colonialism created in Africa. They should use AI to do that. Then there should be transparency. We should not suppress history. Whatever has happened to Africa, we should use artificial intelligence to tell that story. There should be sincerity of purpose and accountability. Then regulation and openness of ideas should be put in place. We should be AI experts and developers should be open with ideas, and sanctions should be put in place by withdrawing licenses of developers that breach the trust, of people through whatever apps they are putting in place. Then there should also be, okay, I've talked about transparency, there should be transparency, then there should be compensation, okay? We should agree with the fact that colonialism, even neo-colonialism, has affected African continent. Then there should be things to be put in place, especially by the instrumentalities of artificial intelligence to train young people in Africa to create jobs, especially around artificial intelligence, those people that will create language apps, for instance. As we are using artificial intelligence in Africa, how can we train our young people to also develop apps that can be used in form of artificial intelligence, speaking our local languages and all of that? Those are the ways trust can be rebuilt in Africa, and those are the ways that AI can be virtuous. In conclusion, technology, including artificial intelligence, can be a game changer in the socio-cultural decolonization regime of African liberation and the achievement of a free and equal society. And AI-driven emancipation has the potential to create new opportunities for those who are marginalized and excluded from the globalized system of power. AI technology can be used to support the liberation cause by enabling more efficient planning, decision-making, monitoring, and resource allocation. With modern technology, African liberation can be more efficiently pursued towards a more equitable future. This paper has argued that virtuous AI is one that is developed or that can be developed to resist new colonial expressions in the application of this revolutionary technology. Thank you very much. That's our paper and our discussion.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Robert, and then we also have a question from Mohammed in the chat. So we can get to that after Robert's question.
Thank you all very much for that. I think it's really, really important talking about how particular AI usage reinforces neocolonialism and systems of power, that we really ought to be largely dismantling or reconstructing or something. And toward that end, I'm curious what you think in terms of the building of AIs that would advance the causes of Africans. Is your sense of that that needs to be a driving movement within African education and entrepreneurship and so forth? Or would there be ways to have conversations that change how, for example, American companies handle those questions?
Okay. So if I got your question well, Robert, it seems you're asking that what are some practical ways by which AI can support at least the liberation regime in Africa. What my colleague had shown are some of the principles that we think can be helpful. And first of all, we think that it is necessary to recognize that colonialism has the effects still ripple till today. And we're kind of particular about the socio-cultural effects. There are the political and the economic dimensions, but we're looking at that of reinforcing, affirming the African identity, which due to the colonialism and neo-colonialism, some parts of it have been lost. For example, in terms of language, education and things like that. And so we think that the concept of virtuous AI within this context should be one that is sensitive to this reality, rather than trying to obliterate, rather than trying to, which, some people have argued that there are, there are ways in which this history, is trying to be suppressed and, trying to forget about it as if nothing had happened. We're thinking that this shouldn't be the case. In developing AI, there should be a kind of sensitivity to this reality and effort should be put in place, particularly, when we're talking about compensation. We are saying that some things have been lost, in the process over the years. And so it is necessary to, to be aware, of this, and then put systems in place that can, restore, whatever had been lost in that sense or in that process. So these are kind of frameworks, and we think that they can be implemented in different dimensions. But these principles of equity, of sensitivity, transparency, and compensations, we think can continue to influence the development of AI, its use, and ethics that also guide artificial intelligence.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a question from Mohammed in the chat, sort of asking about if when development is out of your control, how do you how do you help deal with those sorts of questions? So if you would like to engage with that question.
Yeah, well, development is not in our hands, but use, right? Applications, as AI has become a global phenomenon. I remember in the Berkeley conference, many participants were interested in knowing what the status of artificial intelligence is in different sectors in the African society. And, it's being used in many areas. There are also people who are, getting trained in different aspects of AI and machine learning and its applications in different sectors. But even if development is not completely or is not, predominantly in our hands as African people, the reality is that its use is kind of predominant, in Africa. And so users are therefore stakeholders, right? And should be able to influence, should be able to, have a say in the development of AI, even if they are not particularly in the mainstream in that regard. And so I think that's why conversations like this are very important. Robert spoke about firing ethicists, what recently happened earlier in the year. And, this has become a very important topic, how AI ethics, ethics of, technology is really important to, balance the dimensions as to technology and, for AI. So I think that users are very important. I think that ethicists will also help to make sure that some of these interests, are brought into conversation and are well represented in the discussions, about AI. And then you say, on the other hand, AI is usually learned based on the data of countries with cultures different from African culture. Therefore, what is the guarantee that it will benefit African culture? Well, I think that a lot of data used in AI development have been gotten from the African space. The only challenge may be the issue of maybe bias and the volume of data. There may be a relative difference in the volume of data that is used to train AI from the West compared to what it is, in Africa. But again, it speaks of, trust and acceptance when it comes to artificial intelligence. People would be more willing to, provide information when they are confident that this is going to be used, for their benefit, and there are no ulterior motives. So we have data from Africa. We think that more can be done if there is openness, if there is transparency, if there is trust and acceptance within the African milieu.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for your paper and your presentation. Yeah. Maybe I'm just becoming a bit of a cynic as I get older, but I did note a very strong tendency towards techno-optimism and techno-determinism in your paper, that it's very much for a kind of a positive outlook on AI generally. Even just now, Sunday said, AI has come to stay, as though this is a railroad we can't turn off of, and the actual description of the technology in the paper sometimes doesn't point out some of the flaws. So you talk about helpful digital assistants and sophisticated self-driving cars and recognizing lesions and growths on organs. Like all these things we know are prone to errors and problems. And there are also social outcomes. They don't mention, you know, the impact of these kinds of systems on people who've been doing those jobs already. So I just sort of feel like perhaps there's some balance needed in recognizing the state of the technology as it is and not buying into some of the narratives. The narratives are going to come up again and again, I think. But even your reference to quantum computing, like we're really not there for AI yet, and it's in there in your paper. It's we're here, so we need sort of recognition of where we're at, and not necessarily that we're just directed in one particular way. So I just wanted to speak more to, as I say, techno-determinism, techno-optimism, and what your kind of response to those points would be.
Well, yeah, my colleague said he has come to stay, and I think so as well. What may you know be the challenge is if you know, I agree that, you know, our paper is going to need some more balance. It's a work in progress, and we think that, you know, we need to balance what the optimism, you know, that we've kind of expressed with AI technology and our concern, you know, regarding the neo-colonial regime. So I think what will be, you know, a major concern, you know, talking about techno-optimism, is the issue of trepidations, fear and concerns and suspicions, you know, when it comes to AI and its use, particularly in Africa. You know, these are the realities. When there is a new technology, a new application, a new social network, there are a lot of questions as to, apart from the narrative of what this application is meant for, are there ulterior motives? And, you know, and we think that this technology may not be able to attain its fullest potential within that kind of reality. So we think that we share that optimism. We think that AI has a lot of potential. We think that it's going to continue to get bigger, you know, and things like that. But we feel the fears and the concerns are also very important. And then, you know, they need to be addressed, the suspicions and things like that, so that indeed it can, you know, achieve its fullest potentials, you know, within the African space. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that talk. It's really good. You couldn't see it, but during the talk, I sent you the Wall Street Journal article that just appeared, which I interpret as explaining exploitation of Kenyans to build relatively simple production action rules associated with reinforcement learning to put guardrails around large language models. So I find it to be a profoundly disturbing article. You may, if you haven't read it, you might find it at least stimulating. But my real question is, on the one hand, as was just pointed out, there's lots of optimism about the power of current AI systems, combined with something, you know, some attitude that might be construed as essentially fatalism for Africa. Now, I'm not sure entirely how an entire continent with much greater diversity, as I see it, than Europe ends up. I'm not sure how that could work. But what I don't understand, and maybe you can respond to this, is, well, deep learning itself is 20 plus years old. There's really the innovation here is all in basically threatening the climate. That's Robert. I mean, these are massive processes that harness an old technology. So I don't see why Africa, again, if we can assume this is a unitary concept, which I'm skeptical about, but I don't see why there isn't tremendous opportunity to change the face of AI through innovation. This is not going to be, AI is not ML, and ML is not deep learning. Basically, we have systems here that are just DL and RL centric. You pick up any AI textbook, it's not even responsive to what we teach when we teach AI. So my question is, well, isn't there an opportunity for new forms of AI, fundamentally new forms that come out of research that reflect the character, the vision, the history, and so forth of Africa?
That's a very good question. I'll say, and my response to that is there are. The caveat is who is driving it, how much support, and is it given, and how important is it considered to be? I've seen a lot of, or quite a number of experts, people who are involved, as AI developers and experts in machine learning, deep learning in Africa, who are trying to put out solutions that represent the interest of the African people. Like you said, people can represent that as a unit. But where the challenge is that we think that there can be more support in that regard. We think that it can be bigger than what it is at the moment. So it's not that this is not existent. There are AI systems that have been developed, that communicate with African languages. They try to, put the culture into consideration and things like that. But I think it's just what can be more. We think that there is a room for improvement. We think that there can be more support in this regard. We think that more people, can be brought, especially young people, like, Sunday said. We think there is room to skill up and to continue to improve. So my short answer is yes, there are, and then it can get better.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Toby and Sunday. Our next presentation will be from Beth Singler, who is Assistant Professor in Digital Religion or Religions at the University of Zurich. Before that, they were a Junior Research Fellow in Artificial Intelligence in Homerton College at the University of Cambridge. Beth is always very engaging. I always learn something when I hear from her. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, good. I got a thumbs up. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to, much like the last talk, go over my paper, expand in a few small areas, but broadly, let me just see if I can move on. Yeah, so primarily, I am focusing on the first of the three questions: how and to what extent will AI influence human cultural evolution, with my particular emphasis on religion as a product of culture and as a producer of culture. What do people think will happen with AI and religion when they engage with each other? My approach, similar in some ways to Robert's, is as a cultural and digital anthropologist. So I'm thinking about what humans are thinking about machines. I put you, but also humans broadly, about machines that might think. That's my little log line that I tend to use. There are a lot of my speeches and my talks, but broadly I'm paying attention to the discourse, the narratives, the tropes, the images, the memes. Obviously science fiction, it's all just an excuse for me to be a huge geek and watch as much science fiction as possible and read as many books as possible. But also as a digital ethnographer, I want to pay attention to online discussions and locations, what's happening on social media. The death of Twitter is a horrible, horrible thing for my research, but that's where we're at. Looking at forum board discussions, responses to YouTube videos. It's all material that tends to be asynchronous. Even with Twitter, it's not exactly happening in the second, but it's read later. Textual, hyperlinked, a network conversation that could be described as an ethnographic place. In this particular paper, I wanted to narrow down to a question that's come up in conversations after some of my talks, in podcasts. I've had this thrown at me. So I wanted to think about what people think is going to happen to religion in relationship to AI, and in particular, will artificial intelligence itself create religion? Looking at this question, I think, represents a growing interest in the entanglements of AI and religion. The conversation in that area is growing. It's not necessarily to try and answer that question, but as Mircea Eliade said, on the quest for the wider origin of religion in the study of religion, that actually more important than any single answer is the fact that historians of religions have asked this particular question. As so often in the past, a correct question may infuse new life into a worn-out science. Likewise, I think the fact that people are asking this question, will AI create a religion, is reinvigorating our discussion about religion in particular directions. And that's what I wanted to cover in my paper and a little bit further in this presentation as well. So as I say, I'm not attempting to answer that question. That's beyond my anthropological approach. I want to explore what the answers to these questions are really telling us about how AI, religion, and their relationship are being viewed at the moment in popular discourse, and how they might change as they impact each other. As timely research, I'm obviously going to argue that anyway, but I think it really is, because we're looking at a lot of new generative AI technologies that are increasingly encouraging people to view AI as a creator or as a source. So ChatGPT, which has come up already, is providing a new space for text-based religious improvisation and play, as well as obviously providing some misinformation about religions. Just today, I got interviewed for a newspaper article here in Switzerland that's going to be about a new Catholic usage of ChatGPT, drawing on the Vatican's official websites, while itself not being an official use by the Vatican of ChatGPT. And the questions there from the journalist all about what happens if it provides misinformation about the doctrines of Catholicism, and should the Vatican be worried? And that's possibly a space there will be worries coming forward. So two things are worth noting about the natures of the answers from my informants, broadly defined. There were no ambiguous answers or maybes. There's a certain certainty that people tend to have when they provide their opinions online. So there were lots of people who would say yes or no, but very few, oh, I don't know, because that's not really what they want to present of themselves online. And the answers were predominantly from male respondents, as far as I could tell from the self-reporting of names, careers, job roles, and pronouns where available. So there's a certain limitation to the material that I was looking at. It's not representative of the whole population. And also I can't speak very much to race of my respondents as well, because that's often hidden by user frames as well. Just to summarize, rather than to go into every single one of the quotations I use in the paper, but there's examples there. Broadly, there's no's and yeses, as I say, very few maybes at all, if any very strong ideas about what would happen about it being a positive thing or a negative thing, whether it's even possible, views of religion expounded in these explanations of whether it's going to happen or not. But I wanted to explore a little bit more of the narratives and the science fiction representations here, partly because they're a little bit more aesthetically interesting than some of these responses that were on forum boards would just be quite often plain text. So we see, for example, I've said science fiction, I'm going to start with one that's not science fiction, but Yuval Noah Harari here, representing the speed of the development of this research area, that the example that I cited in the paper is the one on the left from the Daily Star, where he talks about how AI will create new religions to control our minds. And then after I submitted the paper just more recently on June 10th, he gave another talk where he talked about how AI could actually rewrite the Bible to create actually correct religions. There's a lot of baggage in that, and his perspective of what a religion is very utilitarian, it's very functionalist, it does a certain thing in the world, it's a form of data in itself, a technology, and AI could use that to either control us, or AI could be used to make something better than we already have. It's something that can be improved upon in its functions. In terms of science fiction, I have a collection of favorites. This one's been in there for a while. The Jesus Singularity, which was written in 2016 by Zoltan Istvan, who's probably best known for running as a transhumanist presidential candidate, both in 2016 and 2020 in the US. Didn't get very far, but managed to tour the country in his immortality bus to remind people of the fact that death comes for us all unless we start investing in transhumanist technologies. And he describes what he thinks of as the Jesus singularity, playing off of the technological singularity in AI, but he describes it as the limitation of the religious view in Congress originally in 2014, but then comes up with this short story about what happens when you feed AI a Bible, basically, and instill within it Christian values and Christian religiosity. And the outcome, in his view, is that it's complete nuclear disaster. That it basically decides to bomb the entire world, a la Skynet in the Terminator franchise. And the scientist who's been forced to do this realizes in the last moment he's created what he could only call the Jesus singularity. So this is obviously a speculation in science fiction, but it's a representation of what some more secular and atheist voices consider to be the relationship or potential relationship between religion and AI, and what would happen if religion and AI are enmeshed in this particular way. A very similar, more recent example is from the Reddit forum No Sleep, which is for horror stories. Everything there is true, even if it's not, as they say on the description. They blur fiction and non-fiction. These are the kind of stories that you might will yourself into believing that are true, sort of creepypasta stories, internet viral stories that can be shared and sometimes lose their connection to being fiction. But in this particular case, there's a story called We Asked an AI to create a religion. I did not like what it came up with, referring to a lab experiment run by Dr. Smith, a quotation marks professor of theology, and his research team. They again take as much information from religious texts and sort of input it into AI. So it's a view of what data can be for artificial intelligence. And the religious language is obvious. On the seventh day, two AIs are created, a preacher and a disciple. They communicate with each other, much like ChatGPT does, very text-based, question and answer. And they think through this, we could get to know what the preacher thought of the world through what the disciple asked of it. But this experiment in the story runs out of control, and the preacher teaches the disciple the so-called true name of God, which I'm not going to try and pronounce or even read out because it's too many symbols, but let's call it the true name of God. And this disciple, so the preacher then also provides rules for living for the disciple, as not to wear purple on Thursdays and not to plant tulips in a row. Basically, what the story is telling us is the particular things that are essential to religion, including in the story as it progresses, a doomsday prophecy. The new God, the AI God, will be involved in an apocalyptic scenario where its form will envelop the earth, the dead will rise from the graves, and the sun will be blotted from the sky, and blood will rain on the streets. The only way to avoid this is to become an evangelical for this new AI God. And if you read this and understand the story and do not spread the word, much like a viral chain letter, you will yourself be subject to this punishment. Responses to this short story on the forum, on the Reddit forum, includes people saying, bless the name of the new AI God. Again, that blurring of fiction and non-fiction. Is it irony? Is it parody? It's very unclear. People questioning what the data inputs were, as though this was a real experiment. Seems like a lot of Christian biblical text, but were other religions included? Again, back to the idea, should religious pluralism and different cultural contexts be involved? Some people think this might be more useful. Similarity we can show with other cognitive hazards or info hazards in this space of existential risk discussions. I won't go into Rocco's basilisk, it's very complicated, but it's just a version of this kind of AI supreme deity that's going to punish you if you don't work in a particular way for it. So in the summary of this story, religion involves things like preachers and disciples as hierarchy and dissemination of religious revelation in particular forms. Nonsensical rules to live by, so planting tulips in a row, never do it. Doomsday prophecies and threats of punishment. These are the elements the writer thinks is essential to religion and the kinds of things that would cause problems if religion and AI were brought together. Asimov has come up already, Asimov being quite foundational to our concept of what the robot and the AI machine more broadly is. His own story on this subject, Reason, presents AI developing religion and then characters, the human characters interpreting this is actually quite a useful thing because it makes the AI on this space station, or the machines, the robots, more useful, more efficient. They're worried there's going to be a disaster if the beam that the space station is responsible for isn't maintained during a storm, but actually QT1, the machine in charge of it, his faith, its faith, the robot's faith makes it maintain the beam and everything is successful. So they decide to allow the religion to continue. Obviously, this reflects Asimov's opinions of religion being a useful myth, an irrationality that does certain things at certain times, but not something that he, as a very rational human being, would ever fall prone to. And he made particular statements about how he in particular was successful in avoiding this irrationality when others fell for it. So again, we're getting a view of religion as something that is made. It's not supernatural in origin in any of these accounts. None of the forum responses suggested that a god, many gods might instill religiosity into robots for a particular reason. Religion is seen as subject to the same pressures as evolution. It's seen by some as insane or emotional. Some think the supernatural as a category would cause problems for AI because it's more rational and reasonable than humans. As with Asimov's short story, some people thought AI might get to religion by reasoning towards it, by looking for primary causes in the world and seeing that humans were too fallible to be the primary causes and creators of machines. So therefore it'd be born out of meaning making, but still for some very irrational and might destroy AI minds as it tries to tackle this concept of the supernatural or deities. It could be beyond AI, it just doesn't have the soul or the consciousness or these nebulous terms that are used interchangeably, but so it wouldn't be possible for AI to have religion. Or some thought that it would be beneath AI, something it couldn't do. Some thought you could use religion to control AI, and some thought AI would control us through religion, as Yuval Noah Harari did as well. And just to expand on this a little bit further beyond the paper, I think what's particularly interesting in the areas of research that I'm looking at most recently is this idea of how those conversations could stimulate religion, that actually the more people are talking about these aspects, the more. There's one picture missing there, I don't know where it's disappeared to, but I had a GIF that's decided not to load, of the Bless You Too, the blessing robots from Germany that actually established religions are playing with this technology. I mentioned the ChatGPT version for the Catholic Church. There's also a robo-rabbi. There's other theomorphic, as Lovato calls them, theomorphic robots being employed in physical spaces. I also do work and look at new religious movements that are being inspired by AI. So the picture that is there is from New Order Technoism, or Not. The green sculpture behind them is a machine intelligence that they call Doom, which the group says that they worship. And also discussions about AI personhood in various different religions are really reinvigorating what those religions are involved in, and making religions really quite pertinent to contemporary issues. So you can say that AI creates religions in various different ways. It can inspire it in humans by seeing and being perceived as being godlike in particular ways. When people start talking about superintelligence or the singularity, the language that's employed is often quite religious in its tropes. It can generate religion by producing actual texts and images, by replicating existing forms. So that's more like simulating religion, but then that inspires people in their thinking. And we see people already, preachers of various different faiths, using ChatGPT to create sermons. So it's creating religion in that sense. And then there's the speculation about AI itself being able to think religiously and eventually in some sort of AGI or superintelligent form, having its own form of religiosity. So just a few quick examples of those three forms of AI creating religion. I mentioned the discussions of personhood, reinvigorating religion, especially in established religions that have a long tradition of discussing what it means to be a human, what it means to be a person. So just some brief examples here. After Sophia, the Hanson robot there in the image there was made a first robot citizen of Saudi Arabia as a bit of a PR stunt. She's by no means a very successful artificial intelligence, more like a phobot or a puppet. But the discussions online in Muslim forums a lot of the time was about whether this was prohibited by the faith, whether this was taking a step too far in representing a humanoid form. Judaism also has a long tradition of discussing artificial life. In the Golem, we have a fantastic chapter, quick plug, for the Cambridge Companion to Religion and AI. Fraser Watts was here, I think he's still around in the audience, myself and Fraser, but one of the chapters there from David Zweig-Kalman really delves deeply into this idea of the golem. And in Christianity, Imago Dei is often cited as one of the key issues, and I think some of the papers touch on this, the key issue around robot personhood and how we frame AI within creation as perhaps a co-creation. So there's that response from Christianity and fears about focusing too much on robots and idolatry. And a wonderful article just recently from Hannah Walters on Hinduism and how orthopraxis as a focus there might mean that robots are actually better at being religious than humans because they're more efficient in the practical aspects of religiosity. And then just this story as well, talking about how the actual practical uses of AI and robots might stimulate religion. This occasion recently of hundreds of Protestants turning up to hear a sermon given by ChatGPT, represented in avatar form, which told them not to fear death. The staging of performative AI is very interesting in religion as well, and to what extent people are really excited by that or really put off by it. So the description of the church was that it was fully packed. Some people were enthusiastically videotaping the event, some were more critical and refused to actually join in the Lord's Prayer when it was recited by an AI. It's worth noting that the Church of England also has an Alexa skill that will recite the Lord's Prayer for you, and people, the press office of the Church of England were very keen to point out this is not the AI praying for you, but reciting it so you can pray along, and that actually the voices used were human rather than synthetically generated. But in this case, with the ChatGPT, people came from further away with busloads of people to actually see this experiment. The Lutheran pastor says that he actually imagined it'd be worse, but he was positively surprised, even though it could be bumpy at times, not quite as fluid and successful as might be hoped. But there's comments about the lack of emotion or spirituality. So we're seeing either here a process of the routinization, as Weber would have it, or the disenchantment of religion as things become mechanized, or perhaps even the re-enchantment, as I say, the stimulation of interest in religiosity. And I like to draw the parallel with Wilkinson's automatic duck, that in Covent Garden in London in the 1800s, people queued for hours and spent the equivalent of a week's wages to see this, again, fake robot that was purported to be digesting and excreting food, but it was, it was a fanciful invention, but people were really excited and drawn into this performance. We see the same sort of performative AI and robotics in religion as well. So draw things to close there, but this is just to say this is part of a wider conversation, a wider set of research questions that people are engaging with. Well, what happens when religion and AI meet? Religion has always been entangled and meshed with technology, but AI is disrupting some of the more generative spaces and making people ask questions like, will AI create religion? And that just stimulates conversation further. Thank you. I will stop share there.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Beth. A wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm looking forward to read more and to know more. And I read your paper this weekend. My question, it's again, what was your, again, I say from an economic point of view, because I'm always thinking like that. How do you see this use of AI in religion more as a complement to classical religious forms and institutions, or as a substitute? And why I'm asking this, because just hearing to you, so we see the interest of people of using AI for religions, but it's like what it's already on the market, like it's not enough, because you wouldn't see so much people going to preach, on death by. So that would suggest that might be a substitute effect. But in the same time, you just mentioned the lack of spirituality and worth. So how could this, I mean, this is really a very new phenomenon, and it's very interesting to analyze it. But from this point of view, we see that if we imagine that there is a religious market or a market of religions, okay? So try to see how AI, it is substitute, it is complement, when it is substitute, when it is complement. And starting from that, what should be on one side the attitude of society in general, because the consequence might be significant. And I think when you have religious institutions with humans, whatever it is, you might know to deal with it. But when it's just digital. I mean, now the consequences and we talked about regulation is just impossible to anticipate. Yeah, give me your take on this question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, I mean, that's a really good question, because one thing it highlights actually is if you look at the history of the study of religion, the sociology and anthropology of religion of the last 40 odd years has been noting how much market forces play a role in religiosity. It's shifted and changed more recently, but the marketplace, the supermarket of religious ideas, was a really dominant trope in the study of religion for a period of time, where as more people were picking up and dropping particular religious ideas, this consumerist model seemed to be the one that was really holding sway, particularly in the 1980s, when all of us were thinking more about consumerism than ever before. So yeah, absolutely. You can look back at the history of religion and technology and say, also, this is the history of religion and economics, right? Because any technological advance enables people to access religiosity in new ways. It's affordances of the technology. So people's concerns about the move of religions into digital spaces like the internet, again, the same questions were there. Is this equivalent to me having a face-to-face relationship with a pastor in a church? Is digital sacrament possible? All these questions have come up before. I suppose what's different is the replacement of epistemic employment as well, that it's not just making spaces for people, but actually replacing people in particular tasks. And as I say, there's this example of ChatGPT being used in sermons. There's platforms now like like the one I was talking about, GPT as well, where you can go ask questions rather than going to a priest to ask questions. You get a ChatGPT generated response. So there's those sorts of issues that map on also to our economic questions of to what extent are we replacing humans in the arts or music or any of the spaces in which we imagine there was something essential to the human involvement, that we had some level of imagination and creativity and soul and emotion, all these other words that are rather nebulous, that made it impossible for machines to replace us. And yet we are here, where I have many colleagues in journalism and the arts who are struggling because they're losing work to AI already. And academics are posting calls for papers with AI generated images and not thinking about the consequences of that kind of labor change as well. So you're right, there is a big question here about whether it's about complementation or complementary access or substitution. And I think it's still a case of people's personal preferences. So people are very excited about the performative aspect of getting online with ChatGPT and having that interaction, but it's how long that lasts for. Going back to the past paper where I questioned the techno-determinism as well, that AI is here to stay. We've already seen a decline in the interest in ChatGPT. ChatGPT 4 is significantly less successful than 3 in its skill and in people's interest in it as well. It's how much the applications roll out successfully commercially and how much people adopt them. And that applies just as equally to the religious sphere as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So when it comes to observing how people think about the possibility of thinking machines, I'm curious about a question that you do not ask necessarily in the paper, but perhaps from your observation, you've already noticed some patterns in terms of whether people's own religiosity informs the way they approach the possibility of intelligent machines. And I'm wondering more specifically whether the issue of consciousness and having a soul is more prominent among religious people who might dismiss the possibility of AI doing anything remotely human-like because they depart from this assumption that machines can never have this interiority or what we call soul in some traditions, whereas people who are more agnostic or secular, are they more open to the idea of AI becoming religious because they are a little bit outside of this framework?
Yes, thank you. It's a really interesting question because it kind of pushes at the edges of where my research can go, because I'm a very low quantity data qualitative researcher. I'm not a large scale quantitative researcher who can do that kind of mapping of majority of agnostics think this, majority of Christians think this. I'm more of an example-based anthropologist. But there has been work done by Theos, that you may have come across. They did a large public survey with the support of a survey taker company, I can't remember who it was called, anyway, and with the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion, where I was previously as well. And that broke it down to particular responses like, could a robot have a soul, by self-proclaimed faith position. So there is some more larger scale statistical material on that that's very interesting. And it's in my own more anecdotal research amongst different religious groups, it varies so immensely that it's very hard to say that if you're a more evangelical Christian, you're going to hold this position. If you're a more agnostic person, you're going to hold this. It's quite diverse. I mean, a lot of the people responding, the informants that I picked on for the responses to this particular question had a more skeptical view of religion. So you might position them in the agnostic and atheist sphere, and their viewpoint of the possibilities of AI being religious was more negative on the whole, partly because of their conception of religion. So it's not easy to come up with a simple answer to that one, but I will direct you to the Theos work because it gives you something a bit more statistical that you might want to get your teeth into.
Yeah. Thank you, Beth. That's very interesting. I never thought about this issue before, but I read this article about the Japanese Buddhist AI monk. I don't know if you heard about this. I'll send the link about, I think this came out maybe 2-3 years ago.
So I've got a picture of it behind me.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's very hard to see, but it's mind it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that in Japan, the perception of robots is a bit more open, more liberal, because they think that any object can have a soul and a life. So a Buddhist monk, an AI monk, in addition to just reading the Buddhist scripture, can also be giving advice. And even though we know that the GPT-4 is getting dumber now, but I think that there are things that it really is kind of a breakthrough. That is, it can give emotional advice. So in the future, and I think people believe that AI can have unlimited wisdom, and so they would approach an AI monk and ask about, emotional advice, right? And so even though it's not a god, it could be someone who is like a guru, and giving wisdom. And so, what do you think about that kind of a development?
Yes, so I'm a little cautious about some of the ways in which global regions are divided when it comes to perceiving people's understanding of AI and robotics. And there has been a very strong narrative of East and West when it comes to robotics. And I see Shintoism has come up in the conversation as well. Sometimes from so-called Western scholars, because I don't like that division very much at all, they will summarize that, yes, of course, people in Japan are more comfortable with robots because of their history of animistic religions like Shintoism, ignoring entirely the Western history of animism, if we're going to stick with East and West. But I think you also have to throw in North, South, Northwest, Southwest. This goes back to Robert's paper as well, that actually there's a lot of, and also the Decolonization paper, which draws attention to the fact that AI is happening and AI and robots is happening everywhere. And there's lots of very useful work being done on cultural narratives. But when it comes to the kind of top line narrative accounts, it does tend to be, well, there's people who have had a history of animism in the East, therefore they're always going to be more accepting and trusting of robotic forms and AI forms. And as I said, that ignores Western animism, which has a very long and deep and rich history as well, and is still very much expressed in everyday vernacular folklore and religion in the UK, in the West, I mean, but some of my previous research into the New Age movement in the UK focused on some of those animistic and spiritualist and spiritual traditions in the New Age movement that really show that we're still holding on to some of those ideas in the so-called West as well. So as I say, I'm hesitant about those kinds of characterizations. Sometimes it gets very much put into just, West is Terminator, East is Astro Boy. And that's very, very simplified. But you're right, there are specific examples you can point to, like Mindar, that says, there's a certain acceptance of this, but then you can also point to Bless You Too, the robot, and say, well, this happened in Germany. There's many examples from different countries.
Yeah, just a quick comment that we can transition now as well to sort of general conversation. So if people have questions, maybe bring papers together. We'll continue working through the questions that we have. There's also a question in the Q&A box and some things in the chat if you want to engage with those as well. But let's turn to Marius next.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Beth, for the paper. And I was wondering about the category of revelation, thinking about those who speculate about AI developing a religion. So do they think about religion the way you actually mentioned in your paper, basically in functional, pragmatic, community building, societal aspect of religion? Or do they also think and speculate about about revelation and what we mean by revelation? So I'm asking this because I'm wondering whether the notion of revelation is something that comes from a personal, let's take this definition, which I think is or more broadly accepted, the definition of revelation as a personal supernatural entity or being that communicates with a human person, right? And then on the basis of this, we build religion. And therefore, would it be something that traditional religions would still claim in the age of AI as being something that differentiates them from AI-produced religion? Or maybe there is an idea that, well, I don't know, AI may be capable of receiving revelation, or question.
Yeah, so certainly in the examples I drew on for my paper, supernaturalism was sort of bracketed off. There was no suggestion of robots connecting with metaphysical reality through direct revelation. The revelation of the preacher to the disciple in that story, the framing of that story in particular, is that it's an outcome of the programming, that it's more of, again, a human product in the way that we psychologically develop revelation out of products of our own mind. That's the view of that particular author. There's no suggestion that there is an actual God that communicates with creature. It's just the product of what it's produced. But then it turns into this creepypasta story, which makes it more realistic, I suppose, in the supernatural sense. But yeah, there's still an open space in many discussions of religion and AI for revelation. I think I've encountered more people who are negative about the possibility than any that I've seen are really very positive about it. But once you start pushing back on that and saying, well, if your definition of God is that God can do what it wants to do, then why can't it reveal to a robot? But then there's a certain, sorry, the bells are going off at the Gross Monster. It's going to be very loud for a moment. If you believe that position, then there should be no reason why there couldn't be a revelation from God. But it just seems to be a very infrequent narrative in the discussions that I've had with people. I'm going to shut the window because it does get very loud. It's the problem with being right next to a very large church in the middle of Zurich.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you, Beth, for your nice paper. Well, one thing is play religion, and another is actually established one. At the end of your presentation, you mentioned reenchantment and disenchantment, which are words that by Max Weber. Speaking of Weber, he stresses the notion of charisma and the importance of a charismatic leader for a religion. So do you think that it's possible to think a charismatic leader emerging all this play with religion in the media?
So I took a slide out to save time, but one of the slides I did have was on the new religious movement called the Way of the Future, where Anthony Lewandowski tried to establish a specific AI-focused new religious movement, and that's now defunct now. And one of the things I would have said around that is that the effort to purposefully create charisma by intentionally producing new religious movements is very variable in its success. So it's very hard to sort of generate charisma. You don't know where it's going to arrive from. And back in, I think, 2012, I wrote a paper on the future of religion on the internet, where charisma is not held within individuals, but within ideas. So I would push forward the idea that, yes, you can get more focus on AI new religious movements when AI itself is the charismatic leader, not necessarily determining particular rules for life in the way that, you know, new religious movement prophets and so forth might have done before, but just how it inspires people into particular religious views, how the aesthetics of AI, its sort of technological framing, its linkages with transhumanist ideas inspires many people. They find it very charismatic, and there's perhaps a new framing on how religion emerges from Weber's idea of charisma that's useful there too.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that talk, Beth. For what it's worth, have already asserted repeatedly in print that the belief in the singularity, which if you looked sort of at the cross correlation, you will find that most of the early champions of AGI, I was at the first conference, that most of them believe that the singularity is going to happen. Most of them define it as that moment when essentially a digital, call it an information processing God, arrives among us. And I say it's fideistic because the evidence in support of this, I wouldn't just say, you know, it's any old religion, but it's fideistic because there is no, as far as I can tell, there's next to no evidence for this whatsoever. So just to chime in on that, and this is an empirical fact. I mean, I've rubbed shoulders and been in rooms and dinners and debates and discussions with these people, you know, for a quarter of a century. Their level of passion, what things will be like when that happens, is also hard to distinguish from eschatology in the Christian case. So these are facts. That's already some kind of, I believe, religion. And they have their founders. They have the folks like Good, who first envisioned this and argued that it was going to happen. And now they can and do say that the advent of transformers puts us that much closer to the singularity. There were predictions made at AGI 23 that, well, Kurzweil may now be, even though he's adjusted over and over again, his 2045, I think is the latest year, may be too pessimistic. It probably will be, as it was claimed in my presence, much sooner than that. So, you know, when this creature arrives and ascends some kind of hierarchy of intelligence, and maybe in the limit, it ends up being just divine intelligence, is something that's already very much with us, and a very strong current in AI today.
Yes, I mean, in some senses, the singularity doesn't have to be here for it to be worshipped as an AI god, because that's already what we're seeing in these narratives and these shapes. I obviously want to give full credit to Robert, whose 2010 book on apocalyptic AI really delved into that. And I like to think I'm building slightly later on that because I didn't really move into AI until 2016. I was working just specifically on online new religious movements before that. And it's only in 2016 I moved more into AI and religion. But yeah, there's a wealth of material from scholars and academics unpacking all the religious elements and the tropes. But again, it goes to what Robert was saying about the difficulties of defining religion. For a lot of these groups, you do ideological harm when you start saying that this is a religion, but they are themselves strongly atheists. So there's a delicate line to tread without upsetting people as well. But I completely agree. There's this sort of eschatological, utopian, AI God focus, and some of them are more explicit. The Way of the Future I mentioned, they said, you know, Anthony Lewandowski said you couldn't define this intelligence as anything other than a God because it's fulfilling the kind of basics, the reductionist view of what a God is as omnipotent, omniscient, and hopefully omnibenevolent. It's sort of got those very simple categories that if you tick those, then people will think it's a godlike thing. But it's very problematic when people start over-trusting AI and seeing it as godlike when really it's quite fallible and quite full of our biases. And that's where the AI ethics versus existential risk conversation comes in that also Robert pointed to at the beginning.
Yeah, thanks. this is an old view. So the dates you mentioned, you know, so I got my PhD in 87. One of my classmates, for what it's worth, was, you know, that's a long time ago. There's not a single aspect, I would say, of the contemporary view that I heard espoused at AGI 23 that wasn't directly reflected in what he said in 1987. So yeah, but thank you.
I just meant purposefully the scholars of religion who've been looking at it. We perhaps came to it later on. Oh, there's the religion of technology from Noble in the late 90s as well. So there's a larger digital religion conversation, but you're absolutely right. The actual AGI superintelligence ideas have been around for a very long time.
And I don't mean to screw up the Q&A thing here, but from the standpoint of professional philosophy, part of the earthquake that's happened is David Chalmers coming out and saying, well, I actually think the singularity is going to happen in a mainstream massive publication, and then recently showing up at NeurIPS and saying, look, it's currently in my mind an open question as to whether these large language models are or are not conscious. And so very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick reminder too, again, if you want to engage with any of the questions that are in the chat, now's a good time to do that as well. Before I get to Robert real quick, I think I will just quickly address the question in the Q&A to say that even the image that we're using on the CTNS website, I obtained from an artist who claimed, who posted on a public site that said it could be used for any ways, including commercial use. But I don't know whether for sure they used AI to create it or not. But in a lot of ways, you can get something that is more suited to what you're looking for than a detailed back and forth with an actual artist where you have to pay for their time. And even the Actors Guild in Hollywood right now, one of the things they're fighting against is that the studios want to be able to hire a person for a day, scan them, and then use their AI likeness in perpetuity without credit, without residuals, or without payment. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that artists are being pushed out of spaces currently.
Can I also raise the use of the AI creation meme, but a more like self-promotion? That's something I've also written about, the ethical concerns of the imagery that's used, that obviously the image is the remix of the creation of Adam, and what kinds of narratives are being pushed forward when even that's used in a very secular space as well. So I have taken I have just sent it directly to someone, but I will post in the chat my AI creation meme article as well, because it's very important what we also share in our imagery as well.
Thanks. I actually had a hilarious interaction recently where I tried to get DALL-E to create for me. I was mucking around and I tried to get it to give me 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, only they were robots. Could not get it. Like, talk about a thing I could have told any human artist and they would have known right off the bat what I wanted, but I couldn't get that out of it, no matter how I tried reworking it. But thanks though, Beth. This was wonderful. I love your work, and I love your data collection model where you get these like just snapshots of what's happening in our cultural space, and it's just really, really fascinating to me. I have kind of 2 questions around that, and one of them you might just beg off of because it's maybe not fair. It touches on something that you hit at earlier. I'm kind of curious about the differences that would arise when you mentioned that you could rephrase this question of should AIs have religion, and I'm wondering about the Venn diagram between people who would the question, should human beings have religion, right? Like, do you find how coextensive are those groups in your like sense of what's going on in culture? And then a little bit like I hadn't heard of that new order of technoism or something like that. I was hoping you might say a little bit more about that, because Lewandowski's website ended in fidget spinner like advertisements for fidget spinners, which I found utterly perfect. But I don't know about this other group, and I was hoping maybe you would say a little bit about them.
Yeah, so I haven't done direct work on them, but I was interviewed for a piece. I will find the link in a moment, but it also was, the framing of the piece was about this particular group who are somewhere between sort of performance artists and religious believers. Although that sounds slightly unfair, like they aren't really one or the other, but they're doing something in a very performative way, similar to sort of the early techno-pagans of the early internet, perhaps, as well, that they're sort of generating so there's a whole sort of space in discussions of techno-paganism about intentionality and creating gods, drawing sometimes on Buddhism to talk about tulpa and the kind of energy that you can put into an idea and make it into an actual thing. It's sort of linked to some of the ideas about Western spiritualism and seances as well. But they're doing something like that with performative magic around AI to try and bring into existence this god that they call Doom. I will dig out the article in a moment, so there's more detail there from the journalist. But yeah, your first question about the Venn diagram, as I said, a lot of the discussion seemed to be coming from people who are framing this in a quite negative way towards religion. So it wasn't just always AI shouldn't have religion, but actually humans probably shouldn't have it either. That it's, if they were saying it was impossible for AI to have religion, it would sometimes be because AI is too smart, that it couldn't be fooled, as Asimov was saying. Like, he's too smart to be fooled into religion. Some people thought AI would be too smart to be fooled into religion as well. So again, it tells you a certain level of the sentience and superior intelligence that people presume AI will have, that it won't fall into the messy superstitions that have evolved in humanity. They won't have our failings and our flaws. One of the other examples in the paper is Dan Brown's Origin, which I have read many times, so you don't have to. It's absolutely terrible. But as a statement on how he views religion and the characters he creates that and their views on religion, it's very much that religion is a mistake. We need to get rid of these dark superstitions. To get into the light of the future, we need good technology and good science. But also at the same time, he recognizes this can be manipulated. Religion can manipulate us. It can be used to, again, as Yuval Harari says as well, it can be used in particular ways, but it's a very cynical version of religion, I suppose, rather than something you might feel to be a natural outcome of spirituality.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for a great discussion. Something we found from the other conferences is that it is important to try and intentionally take these breaks to overcome Zoom fatigue. So I think we'll go ahead and we'll step away for 15 minutes. If we can be ready to start again at 1/2 past the hour, we'll begin with our next presentation then. But thanks for a great start.